Today, our guest is the Honourable Anthony Albanese, who was sworn in as Australia's 31st Prime Minister in May 2022. Labor holds just 5 of Queensland's 30 seats, so I would say it's a safe bet that we'll be seeing plenty more of you Prime Minister in the lead up to the next election. Mr Albanese previously served as a Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the House of Reps. As Infrastructure Minister and Communications Minister, he delivered nation-building projects connecting the country through thousands of kilometres of roads and rail and rolled out the NBN. Mr Albanese was first elected to the Australian Parliament in 1996, and in 2019 he was elected as the leader of the Australian Labor Party. He grew up with his mother Marianne in a council house in Sydney, and as he watched his mother juggling the challenges of life on a disability pension, he came to understand the power of a parent's love in the face of hardship and the power of government to change lives for the better. This knowledge, he says, still drives him today, both as Prime Minister and as a father, as he works to build a stronger Australia to hand to his son Nathan's generation. Please join me in welcoming Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
Well, thank you so much, Lydia, for that very warm and generous introduction. And I begin by acknowledging as well the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I do want to acknowledge as well my colleagues who are here today, Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, Ed Husick, the Minister for Industry and Science, Senator Nita Green, who is the Assistant Minister, including for the Great Barrier Reef, and Graham Perrott, the member for Moreton. I also want to acknowledge Mick de Brenny, the Queensland Minister for Energy and Clean Energy Jobs and the Leader of the House here in Queensland, and acknowledge as well Matt Burnett and all the other mayors and Shire presidents who've joined us here today en masse. Thank you very much for giving me the honour of attending here today, and I thank all the sponsors as well, and of course the Queensland Media Club. It's good to be back here for my third address to the Queensland Media Club to talk about our government's vision for a future made in Australia. I wanted to give this speech here in Queensland because you have such a pivotal role to play in realising that vision and building that future. I'm here in Brisbane, but our government's plan is about Gladstone and Mackay and Rockhampton and Townsville and Mount Isa and Cairns as well. Because for Australia to seize the opportunities of the next decade, for our nation to generate the energy, skills, jobs, technology and investment that will power our future prosperity, we need every community in Queensland included, involved and empowered. Cities, suburbs and regions alike. We need Queenslanders everywhere to be able to access high-quality education and training for good, secure jobs. We need Queenslanders everywhere breaking ground on new infrastructure, building new energy projects and mastering new technologies. And we need Queenslanders everywhere to be part of a new advanced manufacturing workforce, researching, designing, building and exporting value-added products to the world. Queensland has always been a great resources state, a great energy state and of course a smart state. Its coal, gas and other resources have helped to power our national economy, and so have the ideas and dynamism of its people. Queensland's role as a resource and energy and innovation state will continue, and it will evolve, because Queensland resources and energy and technology will contribute to making Australia a renewable energy superpower. Queensland will be at the forefront in helping the nations in our region grow, industrialise and decarbonise, and help the world achieve its net zero goals. When I look at the Queensland Government's Energy and Jobs Plan, I see that scale of ambition. Australia's largest solar farm at Western Downs, one of the biggest wind farms in the Southern Hemisphere near Warwick, backed by the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. New pumped hydro near Gympie, and one of the biggest pumped hydro projects in the world planned for Mackay. copper string running from Townsville to Mount Isa and connecting the Northwest Minerals Province to the national energy grid, making Gladstone a hydrogen hub and a global capital for green minerals. And the most important national project of all, making sure workers and communities aren't left behind, starting with the Queensland Job Security Guarantee. In all this, we need to aim high, be bold and build big to match the size of the opportunity that is right there in front of us. And we have to get cracking. We have unlimited potential, but we do not have unlimited time. If we don't seize this moment, it will pass. If we don't take this chance, we won't get another. If we don't act to shape the future will shape us. That's the sense of purpose and urgency that drives our government. We know there is a world of opportunity out there, and we know the world won't wait for us. If we want to make our future here in Australia, here in Queensland, we have to go forward now. The first 4 years of this decade have certainly tested the resilience of our economy and our society alike. Alongside the devastation of floods and bushfires, Australia has endured a once-in-a-century global pandemic, followed, of course, by the most significant international energy crisis in 50 years, both of which have combined to inflict profound economic consequences on supply chains, energy prices, inflation and interest rates. These global shocks and their aftershocks continue to impact our economy and our budget. This is why helping Australians with the cost of living is our government's #1 priority. It's why the budget that Jim Chalmers will hand down in a month's time will deliver a tax cut for every single Australian taxpayer, all 13.6 million of them. In January this year, I went to the National Press Club to announce that we were changing the tax plan that we inherited from the Morrison government to make it better and fairer for Middle Australia, to help more women, more young people, more part-time workers, more parents returning to work and more low and middle income earners, and to boost workforce participation by creating a greater incentive for people to take another shift or work an extra day. As a result of these changes, from the 1st of July, every Queenslander will get a tax cut, not just some. Nearly 9 out of every 10 Queensland taxpayers will get a bigger tax cut. Of course, we knew that these changes would generate some political noise, and indeed they did. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition promised to fight our tax cuts before she'd even seen them, and absolutely committed to reverse them. Peter Dutton called for an election to stop our tax cuts going ahead, and the LNP remained determined to roll them back. But as I explained at the time, when economic circumstances change, the responsible thing for governments to do is to change their economic policy. That's true when it comes to helping people with challenges they are facing here and now. Boosting wages so people earn more, cutting taxes so people keep more of what they earn. Government needs to have this same capacity to respond and adapt, to anticipate change and shape it when it comes to building for the future. I said earlier that for Australia to succeed in the decade ahead, we need every Queensland community and every Queenslander to play a part. Government has to play its part too. We need to be clear-eyed about the economic realities of this decade, recognising that the game has changed and the role of government needs to evolve. Government needs to be more strategic, more sophisticated and a more constructive contributor. We need sharper elbows when it comes to marking out our national interest. And we need to be willing to break with old orthodoxies and pull new levers to advance the national interest. We have to think differently about what government can and must do to work alongside the private sector to grow the economy, to boost productivity, improve competition and secure our future prosperity. combining market tools with government action to create wealth and create opportunity. We need to take a fresh look at how government can support small business and startups and service industries to diversify our economy and our trade, not just playing to our traditional strengths with our traditional partners, but offering new products and services to new markets. We need this change in thinking and approach because the global economic circumstances are changing in ways far more profound than the consequences of the pandemic or conflict alone. This decade marks a fundamental shift in the way nations are structuring their economies, a change every bit as significant as the Industrial Revolution or the Information Revolution, and more rapid and wide-ranging than both. Domestic economic policy settings are being reshaped by a new set of global economic imperatives, and domestic economic priorities are reshaping trade policy. In the years following the Cold War, people spoke about the end of history, the benign assumption that free trade would spread unchallenged and globalisation would guarantee peace and prosperity for all. Yet even in countries like Australia, they have benefited enormously from the opening up of our economy and engaging in our region. Opportunity has not been shared evenly. In other parts of the world, the fault lines are far wider. Strategic competition is a fact of life. Nations are drawing an explicit link between economic security and national security. The so-called Washington consensus has fractured, and Washington itself is pursuing a new direction. The United States has implemented the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Acts and pursued what they call a small yard, high fence approach to critical industries. The European Union has introduced its European Economic Security Strategy. Japan has the Economic Security Promotion Act. The Republic of Korea is reframing its economic policy around a national security strategy. And Canada has brought in new rules to tighten foreign direct investment in their significant critical mineral reserves. All these countries are investing in their industrial base, their manufacturing capability and their economic sovereignty. This is not old-fashioned protectionism or isolationism. It is the new competition. These nations are not withdrawing from global trade or walking away from world markets or the rules-based order. And let me be clear, nor should Australia. 27% of our economic output depends on trade, so do 1 in 4 of every Australian job. We will continue to champion global markets and free trade to build bilateral and multilateral cooperation and forge agreements. Equally, we must recognise that the partners we seek are moving to the beat of a new economic reality. In their different ways, they are realigning their economies to better drive and distribute growth across their own populations, rebuilding the social licence for economic reform through better job security and higher wages. They are preparing their businesses and workforces to adapt to digital technology, to grasp the opportunities of artificial intelligence and also safeguard against its risks. They're investing in more clean energy, producing more clean energy and exporting more clean energy. And they are upgrading their ports, roads, rail, broadband and energy grids. Of course, not every element of every other nation's approach will be right for us, but we must recognise there is a new and widespread willingness to make economic interventions on the basis of national interest and national sovereignty. And, critically, none of this is being left solely to market forces or trusted to the invisible hand. The heavy lifting of economic transition and industrial transformation is not being done by individuals, companies or communities on their own. It is being facilitated, enabled and empowered by national governments from every point on the political spectrum. Because this is not about ideology, it's about opportunity. and it's about urgency. Securing jobs, attracting investment and building prosperity has never been a polite and gentle process where every nation gets a turn. It's always a contest. It's always a race, governed by rules, driven by competition. And Australia simply can't afford to sit on the sidelines. Being in the race does not guarantee our success, but sitting it out guarantees failure as the world just moves past us. An inescapable lesson of the past half-century is that Australia cannot isolate ourselves from global economic change, even if we wanted to. Our challenge and our great opportunity lies in anticipating change, shaping it, and making sure it delivers for our people. And doing this in our own uniquely Australian way. We are a trading nation, an outward-looking economy. We are engaged in the Indo-Pacific, a leader in our region, a middle power in our own right. Australia is in this race no matter what. Our government wants Australia to be in it to win it. We can do this by building on our existing strengths, but also looking beyond them. In so many important ways, Queensland perfectly captures the unique set of advantages and imperatives Australia has. Our resources, both in and above the ground, essential to the future of global energy. Our location, on the doorstep of the fastest growing region of the world in human history. Our natural environment, a unique treasure and an international drawcard. Our people, smart, skilled, resilient and adaptable. And never to be underestimated, our democracy and our society. A social safety net that empowers people, a world-leading superannuation system, remarkable universities and TAFEs, and a multicultural society that gives us a family connection to every nation in the world. We can make this a winning combination, but only if we work at it. By adding value to our resources here, by turbocharging our engagement with our region, diversifying our exports, deepening our ties and building new markets for our expertise and our services, as well as our products. By investing in our people, education and skills, but also the housing and infrastructure and quality affordable care that boost productivity and the quality of life. By protecting our environment, for tourism, for farming and, importantly, for future generations. And strengthening our society, delivering the services and care that nourish aspiration and help people lead better lives. These established strengths are essential, but they are not enough. Drawing only on what we already have guarantees a diminishing return. The wasted decade of our predecessors is proof of that. Australia cannot afford another 10 years running on the fumes of past economic reforms. We cannot afford another decade where government is a drag on business investment and productivity instead of a driver of it. A decade where businesses investing in the future, from embracing renewable energy to promoting gender equality, were acting in spite of government, not in concert with it. We know the high price of the last decade, low productivity growth, low business investment and a narrowing of our economic foundations. As the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has put it, Australia's economy is not productive enough, not resilient enough, not competitive enough. We need a new wave of economic reform to change this, to drive growth, improve competition, lift productivity and create the next generation of prosperity and opportunity. This new wave demands a new approach, and since the last election, our government has been laying the foundations to deliver it. Embracing clean energy, securing a landmark 10-year national skills agreement, creating the National Reconstruction Fund, and establishing the Net Zero Economy Authority, putting science together with industry under Minister Ed Husey to make sure that we commercialise the opportunities arising from Australian innovation. In next month's budget, and beyond, we'll be building on that foundation. In this time of transformative opportunity, our government will not be an observer or a spectator. We will be a participant, a partner, an investor, an enabler. We will be guided by three important principles. First, we need to act and invest at scale, moving beyond a hope for the best approach, where the priority has been minimising government risk, rather than seeking to maximise national reward. Second, we need to be more assertive in capitalising on our comparative advantages and building sovereign capability in areas of national interest. For too long, governments have taken a reactive, patchwork approach which has been more about managing an immediate crisis than maximising long-term opportunity. Our government will be proactive when it comes to backing Australia's comparative advantages and delivering on our national interests. The investment we've made through our Solar Sunshot program is proof of that, as is our Hydrogen Head Start program and our Critical Minerals facility. Thirdly, we will continue to strengthen and invest in the foundations of economic success: affordable and reliable clean energy, a better and fairer education system, skilled workers, secure jobs, fair wages, modern infrastructure, shared ambition with business and private capital, and a positive regulatory environment. We recognise that for Australians to fully share in the rewards, government needs to be prepared to use its size and strength and strategic capacity to absorb some of the risk. Only government has the resources to do that. Only government can draw together the threads from across the economy and around our nation. To anchor this reform and secure this growth, today I announce that this year our government will create the Future Made in Australia Act. We will bring together in a comprehensive and a coordinated way a whole package of new and existing initiatives to boost investment, create jobs and seize the opportunities of a future made in Australia. We want to look at every measure that will make a positive difference, investing in new industries and ensuring that workers and communities will share in the dividend. That means giving the new Net Zero Economy Authority every tool it needs to support resource communities, in particular through the coming period of economic change, town by town, worker by worker. This isn't something that happens overnight, it's the work of a generation. But the preparation for what comes next has to start now. This means looking at how government procurement can support small business and local manufacturing, as well as sustainability and the circular economy, putting together the most efficient and effective combination of financing facilities and investor incentives to drive new economic growth, securing greater sovereignty over our resources and critical minerals, driving competition reform to deliver a better deal for Australian consumers, Australian farmers and producers and Australian workers, delivering better and broader community benefit from renewable energy projects and fast-tracking the infrastructure that supports them, maximising the strategic value of our government investment funds and, of course, our national superannuation system, and opening the doors of opportunity by giving more Australians in our regions and suburbs the chance to get a TAFE qualification or a university degree. That's just some of the reform agenda that we will be outlining this year. We're open to all good ideas, from business, from industry, from unions, from state and local government and from across the parliament. This won't be a one-off. It's about building an enduring framework that can adapt over time. Obviously, Australia cannot go dollar for dollar with the United States Inflation Reduction Act. But this is not an auction, it's a competition. And Australia can absolutely compete for international investment when it comes to our capacity to produce outcomes, the quality of our policies and the power of our incentives. As the Treasurer said, part of the objective here is about Australia presenting potential investors with a single front door, a clear path to investing in Australia, in Queensland, in hydrogen, in green metals and in advanced manufacturing. And the right skills, supply chains and processes to get projects up and going and see this investment realise a positive return. Above all, this is about giving Australian businesses, Australian communities and the Australian people every possible opportunity to benefit from this moment. Such a central part of the story of Queensland is the capacity of people in this big state to do the big things, transforming Brisbane to the global city we're in today, transforming Gladstone into an international industrial centre, transforming the Gold Coast from a beautiful strip of beach to one of the world's great tourism destinations, safeguarding the extraordinary natural treasures of the Great Barrier Reef and the Daintree, building the railways and infrastructure and ports to spread the opportunity of the resources boom across the regions, reviving Queensland unis and research centres and TAFEs through the Smart State agenda. All this speaks for Queenslanders' capacity to build, but also the creativity to reinvent, the foresight to turn the dividends flowing from one wave of growth into surfing the opportunities of the next wave. That's never been more important for Queensland and for Australia. Our government is investing in manufacturing to make more things here. We're building the infrastructure and clean energy to power new growth. We're training people in new technologies. We're facilitating private sector innovation and catalysing new investment. We're building an economy with more secure work and fairer wages. That's what I mean by a future made in Australia, a future where we compete and win for the great prize of new prosperity and win our way by staying true to the values that make this the greatest country on earth. Fairness at work, equality in society, compassion and dignity in our social safety net, and unshakable belief in opportunity for all. Reform that holds no one back, progress that leaves no one behind. A stronger, fairer and more prosperous future made right here in Australia. Thanks very much for having us here today.
Thank you for that, PM. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions and then I'll throw to my eager colleagues down the back. So I guess just to start off, have you done any modelling? Oh, sorry, I'll let you have a glass of water, drink of water. Have you done?
Thanks for that.
Have you done any modelling on the amount of jobs that can be created under your Future Made in Australia plan?
What we know is on a case-by-case basis that the opportunities there to grow enormous jobs. Take, for example, the announcement that we made in Liddell just a couple of weeks ago. This is an old coal-fired power station that the former government, we used to hear day after day in question time that it'd stay open. Of course it's shut, as did a range of those power stations under the former government, and there's timetables for a closure, a transition of industry is happening. Now, there was fear about what that would mean. SunDrive, just one company that can benefit from our solar sunshot program, is looking at employing more people there, building the most efficient solar panels in the world, in an agreement, a deed that they have with AGL already. There'll be more people employed just there in that one company on that one site than were employed under the former power station. And that's just one of the activities taking place on this site. So we think that in terms of opportunities, one of the things that we know is that without acting, it's not as if things will stay the status quo. Rio Tinto, for example, has just done the largest deal on renewables for the facilities around Gladstone that's been done in Australia. Either there's a transition and they thrive and employ more people, or they employ far less. So one of the things that we have done is look at what the opportunity cost is as well of not acting. And that's severe. That's a loss of jobs, a loss of communities, a failure to transition, because the rest of the world is moving on this. And so we are very positive that across the board, by government putting in place structures that facilitate and provide that catalyst for private sector activity, what we'll see is a great many more jobs grow in the future, and a great deal more security as well for existing processes like metal manufacturing, be it aluminium or steel in this country, and that you'll see substantial growth in jobs.
So it sounds like more jobs, but no firm figure yet. Is there a risk that the energy transition is going to become more expensive, or power prices will increase if we're relying more heavily on the high-wage Australian manufacturing workforce?
No, well, we know that the market is speaking, and the market tells us that the cheapest form of new energy is renewables, and that's what's driving that change through. That's why there's nothing to stop people building a new coal-fired power station except reality, except the market. We had, over the last couple of terms of the former government, we had here in Queensland, at Collinsville, we had proponents of a new plant given seed money to do a study. That led nowhere, and was always going to lead nowhere, because it just doesn't stack up in terms of where that new investment will go. So we want to create an environment whereby we provide support, but where we acknowledge the importance of market mechanisms. And what that means is that investment in renewables will lead to cheaper power, because that's what every economist tells us. That's what the Australian Energy Market Operator tells us as well through their integrated systems plan.
Just moving on to another topic. Last month, your government announced a $4 billion deal with the Northern Territory government to address overcrowding in First Nations communities. Here in Queensland, we have 17 remote communities, and we have two First Nations mayors here today. We've got Wayne Butcher over there from Lockhart River and Alf Lacey from Palm Island. In Mayor Butcher's community, there's up to 11 people living in a 2-bedroom house. That's 3 generations living under one roof. When will your government announce a similar deal for Queensland?
We've already got substantial deals for Queensland that are going right now.
But there's no specific carve-out for indigenous housing in that $10 billion.
What there is as part of the Housing Australia Future Fund, there's money specifically for fixing up repairs in remote indigenous housing. That deal was done specifically with the Northern Territory along with the education arrangements. Currently there are negotiations taking place between our Minister, Julie Collins, and every state and territory government over the future housing and homelessness agreement. That's the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement that runs for 4 to 5 years. In addition to that, we have 17 different measures worth $25 billion. The Queensland government benefited last year with a $500 million social housing accelerator that's available for them to spend wherever the Queensland government likes, was made immediately available to them. That can be either repairing existing housing or building new housing. That was part of the $2 billion social housing accelerator. The Housing Australia Future Fund is a $10 billion fund that we have substantial over commitments in the first round that closed just a few weeks ago. That shows the demand is there. And we want to work with every state and territory government as those state and territory agreements are done as part of that national agreement, and Queensland will be an important component in that.
Okay, I think we'll throw over to my colleagues at the back. It's Tim Arvier from Channel 9.
PM, in Queensland, Labor has lost seats at the last federal election, the Queensland By-elections, and lost the Brisbane City Council elections. Who do you think's going worse, Labor in Queensland or the South Sydney Rabbitohs?
Too soon. I remind you that competitions are won in September, not in April. Something I was reminded of during the second half of last year when Souths were on top of the ladder after round 11. So I think it's a really smart strategy for us to reverse that this year and to go real bad in the first half and then come home strong. That's the plan. As for Labor, Labor has been, of course, one of the things that Queensland shows through the period of most of the time I've been in government federally or in Parliament federally, has seen a Queensland Labor government here. And I think the last time that Queenslanders took a risk by voting LNP in the state, what they got was mass sackings, mass cuts in education and health and transport and services. And I reckon that the Campbell-Newman experiment is something that we'll see people reminded of that in the lead up to the election in October. And I think that Stephen Miles is someone who's a friend of mine to declare an interest. And I think that Stephen Miles is putting forward a vision for Queensland that includes the Energy and Jobs Plan. And at the Queensland LNP seemed to me to be run by the same people who ran the Newman government, and that didn't end well.
Prime Minister, Marlina Whop from 7 News. Stephen Miles himself has admitted that winning the Queensland election will be like climbing higher than Mt Everest, and he said he's not even at base camp yet. What is going wrong for Labor in Queensland, and how can the Premier improve so that voters aren't turning away from the party?
Well, I think Stephen Miles will be himself. He's someone who's a compassionate guy. He's someone who cares about his fellow Queenslanders, and he's someone who understands jobs and the economy here, and that Queensland can have an incredibly bright future if it seizes the opportunities that are before it. I've spent time with Stephen, I've got to say, in a way in which neither of us would have liked through the natural disasters that occurred over, I think I had 3 visits to far north Queensland at the end of last year, and then in January, and also to the Gold Coast. And what I've seen in Stephen is someone who really cares about people, who doesn't want people to be left behind, and that sort of compassion I think will shine through over this year, and I wish him well. I'm not a participant in the Queensland state election, but certainly I will be prepared, as I always am. I've launched a few Labor campaigns around the country, and I've launched a few campaigns in Queensland over a period of time as well. So it's difficult for a long-term government. They've been in government for 3 terms. Anastasia, I think, retired with an extraordinary record of leading Labor to victory on 3 occasions, and she deserves incredible respect and is a Labor hero for forever as a result of that. But we'll wait and see how it goes. I heard a lot of people write off Daniel Andrews before the last election in Victoria too.
Prime Minister, Madura from the Courier Mail. Queensland's best practice industry conditions have been under the spotlight this week. It's a policy the building industry has warned drives up construction costs and hurts productivity. A similar policy was successfully added to Labor's binding national platform last year. Will your government introduce best practice conditions in this term, and will it apply to the projects you've talked about today?
Well, we have our industrial relations policy has been carried, so you can see what we've done. We don't have any intention for further IR legislation, but we make no apologies for the fact that what we have done in industrial relations has led to, for the first time in a long while, real wages increasing. We think that that is important. And secondly as well, we've made sure that we have targeted areas of most in need. So we've put forward submissions to the national wage cases to make sure that people didn't fall behind. You might recall, Madura, during the federal election campaign, me holding up a $1 coin and saying that I would absolutely support a $1 an hour increase if the Fair Work Commission decided to do so in their case. The then Morrison government said the sky would fall in, the economy would collapse and everyone would be out of work. The truth is that we've created, or it's been created on our watch, more jobs than any new government in Australian history, more than double, around about 1,200 or more than 1,200 a day compared with 600 under the period of the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison governments. We're very proud of the fact that we've created jobs whilst we are seeing wages increase, and while we not only are going to have people earn more, they're going to keep more of what they earn as a result of the tax cuts that will come in place on July 1 that we've legislated. That's a good thing for the economy. What those people will do is to spend money in their local shops and supermarkets and on the necessities of life. The coalition said that the sky would fall in if we gave people earning under the lowest rate. Lowering it from 19 to 16 cents has made an enormous difference, and that is something that we're very proud of and we stand by.
Prime Minister Kate McKenna from the ABC. Last year, Queensland had more young people in detention than on an average day than New South Wales, Victoria, ACT, South Australia and Tasmania combined. Many of them are Indigenous. How does that sit with you? Is it a badge of failure, as some have described?
Well, what we need as a nation is to do what we can to make sure that people aren't left behind. That's about creating opportunities for people. We have, one of the programs that we have federally for Indigenous people is justice reinvestment programs. Now, they've operated in places like the New South Wales North Coast and other places that we are rolling them out. That's about bringing together law enforcement with community leaders, with young people themselves, about talking through issues, about diversion programs, but also about giving people opportunity through education and through employment. One of the great successes of our fee-free TAFE program is how many Indigenous young people have participated in that program, getting an opportunity to see a secure future for themselves and a pathway to a career. That is so important. So these issues, of course, intergenerational disadvantage is a difficult one. It's one that hasn't occurred over a year, hasn't occurred over a term of any government. The truth is that all governments of all persuasions need to do better when it comes to providing opportunity for Indigenous Australians. It's something that my government is very committed to, and I want to work with the different levels of government to achieve better outcomes.
Prime Minister, Kaiser Kaiser Shields from Sky News. How do you expect the plan you've unveiled today to impact the economy at a time when inflation is approaching the RBA's target range?
I see it as positive. It's about encouraging private sector investment. It's about making sure as well that all of the measures that we've put in place, including all of our cost of living measures, have been aimed at areas that would not contribute to inflation. So, for example, the tax cut changes I've spoken about today, that will be the major support that we provide to Middle Australia in the budget in a month's time. That's worth $107 billion over the forward estimates. But because it will increase workforce participation, that was seen as countering the higher marginal propensity to spend that people on lower incomes have compared with higher incomes people who would take a higher tax cut and just save it. So we examined all of that through, and I assure you that when all of the measures that we're considering in the budget come forward through our expenditure review committee process, then Jim Chalmers and Katie Gallagher, and Katie as the Finance Minister wields a big stick, making sure that what we're doing is fiscally responsible. We turned a $78 billion deficit that we inherited into a $22 billion surplus. That's something that I remind people, the former government was elected in 2013 promising a surplus the first year and every year thereafter, and didn't achieve it once.
Tess Bennett from the Australian Financial Review. You've said this afternoon that you want to make more things here. So why didn't the government, state or federal, provide Tritium with a lifeline? They've closed their Brisbane factory and moved manufacturing to the US.
Well, that's an example of a lost opportunity which is there. Tritium were producing the fastest EV charging stations in the world and were exporting them. They made a commercial decision based upon the settings that were there, based upon, in part, the incentives that are there in the Inflation Reduction Act. That's an example of SunDrive. If there weren't opportunities for SunDrive to stay in Australia, then they too would have gone offshore. We need to acknowledge that this is a reality, that we are in a global competition for capital, a global competition where there are incentives for companies to be based in the United States, in different economies as well, through the different moves which are there, which is the context of why we are ensuring through what will be one of the centrepieces of the budget in May. We have put in place a range of mechanisms up to now. We've been in government less than 2 years. And already, if you look at some of the turnaround that we have had in industry development, the positive initiatives, including electrolysers in Gladstone last Monday, as in 3 days ago. I'll be back in Queensland next week for another announcement consistent with the Future Made in Australia. We've been to Liddell, I've been to Whyalla looking at green steel and what's happening there in the Upper Spencer Gulf. There are a range of really positive things happening. The defence industry initiatives that are happening around AUKUS as well. We are working, we've got Brisbane Airport, a sponsor today. We're looking at sustainable fuels as one of the big things that we need to work on, and Catherine King's working on those initiatives. It's not just one thing we're looking at. We're looking at a comprehensive plan for how we ensure that we make more things here. Now, we won't have every company based here. Companies will make decisions from time to time. They're private sector operators. But what we can do is make sure that we're competitive, make sure that we have mechanisms here that encourage that value add and encourage that activity to stay here.
Hi, Prime Minister. Matthew Karstunen from 10 News. You mentioned in your speech that Australia needs to get cracking. How do we market Australia to the rest of the world in terms of manufacturing when we've got the likes of China and many Southeast Asian countries that are already doing it and far cheaper compared to cost of labour here?
Well, the end of your question goes to why the game has changed, because you go to the cost of labour. And it's true that in the 70s and 80s, we saw a lot of manufacturing leave Australia because of the cost of labour. But production is changing. So for the same output, because of advances in productivity and technology, labour is less of the costs of production, less as a proportion. And that means that the other inputs are more important. Transport. We have here in Queensland all of the minerals that go into just about everything that will be important for the 21st century. You know, vanadium, cobalt, copper, lithium, all here. And that means that in many cases now what makes economic sense, rather than take all of those inputs, manufacture somewhere else, and then import it back, the costs of transport, the costs of all of that, it's changed the commercial nature of manufacturing here in Australia. And particularly with new and emerging industries as well, like green hydrogen, you have a capacity for it to be producing, because we have an advantage, space, put simply. You can't have the same size solar plants in Java that you can have here in Queensland. A bit more space. Similarly, Upper Spencer Gulf, that's why that makes it commercial in South Australia. The work in the Pilbara and other areas as well. The Copper String project is about taking various projects and linking it up in terms of the grid. So there's a range of things that you can do. Certainly Rio are very explicit about what they're looking at here. And unless that occurs, then we will lose industries. But companies like Rio and BlueScope and others are very engaged in this. And that's what changes the dynamic. That's why it makes a lot of sense here to have battery manufacturing, for example, because you have everything in the one spot that can be manufactured here. But we need to work with the private sector, and government needs to be engaged. And part of the message in the region, and it was a message done by Nicholas Moore, the former head of Macquarie Bank, did the report on the Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040 for Australia. And if you look at that report, it goes through every country and where Australia's engagement can be greater. So Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, Singapore. It's not one size fits all, but our comparative advantage in different industries means that you can have a really positive outcome, which is win-win for our trading partners. And that was one of the themes as well of the business side of the ASEAN summit that we held in Melbourne last month, where the leaders of all of those countries came. And that was a really positive sign about how Australia was positioned. I mean, last week I was here in Queensland in Ipswich looking at the boxes. That's a German company manufacturing vehicles here in Queensland and exporting them in a $1 billion deal back to Germany. That shows what we can do because of the range of advantages that we have. We need to not talk ourselves down. We need to talk ourselves up and be optimistic about seizing the opportunities which are there.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more.
Alison Paterson from Queensland Country Life. Prime Minister, you mentioned as a part of your Future Made in Australia today that you are wanting to help every Australian, whether they're in regional, rural, remote or urban communities. This morning in the Federal Court, AgForce had their first hearing regarding their opposition to Glencore's subsidiary wanting to use the Great Artesian Basin for carbon capture storage. And there's hundreds of thousands of Australians who are impacted by that very issue. And one of them said, we feel like we've been left behind. We feel like people don't understand what's going on. They don't really know what this is going to mean. And they're very concerned, they tell me, about the irreparable damage to the Great Artesian Basin. Does that mean that your government, talking earlier about the great national treasures we have in Australia, you'll do something to a great national treasure that is underground so it can't be seen like the Great Barrier Reef or the rainforest, but it is, if it gets damaged, it's going to really impact the future of every Australian and future generations to come?
Thank you. I'm going to be careful about the answer here because of the way that you framed the question, which was...
That's my job, Prime Minister.
I understand that, but it's my job not to comment on things that are before the courts. And your opening statement said before the courts this morning. So I'm always cautious. There've been a few issues with politicians and court cases you might have noticed in recent times. And so I will be cautious. I will say, though, without referring to any of the specifics, obviously the Great Artesian Basin is a great national asset and is very important. But I won't comment on something that has, in your own words, been before the courts this morning.
Hi, Prime Minister. Eden from The Guardian. Peter Dutton has blamed police and Labor for the rise in anti-Semitism. He said police were going soft on people and that you had been too weak. What do you think of those allegations and of Mr Dutton using the Gaza issue to make domestic political criticisms?
I think that Peter Dutton's reference to Port Arthur, I think people will draw their own conclusions there about that. I did see those comments and was somewhat taken aback by those comments, and it's up to him to explain that. I'm someone who has spent time, including recently in Parliament House with the family of victims of Port Arthur, and I think that sometimes what Peter Dutton does in his comments is to think about how hard you could possibly go and how angry you could possibly be, and then go one step further. I think when it comes to the Middle East, these are complex issues. They do not need people talking up the heat, they need people turning it down. That is something that my government has done and will continue to do here in Australia. I'm very concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism. I'm concerned about Islamophobia. I'm concerned about any division in our community, and I'm concerned that that there have been occasions where there have been attempts to politicise this or weaponise these issues in a way which, in my view, isn't appropriate. We are an incredibly successful multicultural nation, where in my local community and in communities here, I'm sure in Queensland as well, I know that people can live side by side, whether they are Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, and be enriched by the diversity which is here. I've long been of the view that our multiculturalism is a strength, not just for ourselves, but that we can be a bit of a microcosm for the world. And we can show that diversity is a strength. We can show that just as it's possible for people to live side by side. I've got in my Marrickville house people of different religions either side of where I live. That's a good thing. That's a great thing. And I think that one of the reasons why that's important isn't just it for itself, but that you can take that spirit to its logical conclusion. If that is possible, it is certainly possible for Israelis and Palestinians to live with security, stability and prosperity side by side, with states, a two-state solution that everyone knows has been spoken about for the entire time that I've been alive, that this has been an issue of conflict that needs a resolution. And that's why Australia and like-minded partners, including, this is no different from the United Kingdom under David Cameron or the joint statements that I've made with the Prime Minister of Canada and New Zealand, who's a Conservative, David Cameron obviously is as well, or indeed President Biden's comments as well. We need to move beyond the cycle of conflict, and that means Israel living within secure borders, being recognised by its neighbours in the Middle East as well. It does mean justice for Palestinians as well, and that is something that we have taken a principled position on. We've been consistent on. Every innocent life matters, whether it be Israeli or Palestinian. The actions of the Hamas terrorist group mean that it has no role to play in the future of a Palestinian state, and we've been very consistent about that. But I do think that political leaders here need to be responsible about the way that they discuss these issues and the language that they use.
Thank you. Did everybody get a go back there? Okay, we're really running out of time, so PM, please make your answer nice and brief.
Hi, Savannah Meacham from Australian Associated Press. Prime Minister, your proposed green energy future relies heavily on local workers. What further incentives can the government offer young Queenslanders to train in this industry through TAFE and University amid cost of living pressures? And for workers in existing carbon industries, how will the government assist them in a shift of industry?
Fee-free TAFE is a pretty good start because I've met people that makes an enormous difference as well. We have our clean energy apprenticeships, a $10,000 incentive from the federal government for engaging in clean energy jobs. We'll need an enormous amount of electricians in the future in these new industries as well. And the second bit was just the second part.
The second part was for workers in existing carbon industries.
We have our Net Zero Economy Authority. That is precisely legislation before the Parliament about how communities don't get left behind, to provide that support through business and unions to every worker to make sure that they can transition, and that legislation was introduced on the last sitting day of the Parliament.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our lunch. Could everyone join me in thanking Prime Minister Anthony Albanese?